Hi, John. Is your tank full?
Is that some sort of metaphor, Dan? Hello.
Could be. Could be a metaphor. But I was really fascinated to discover that our Prime Minister is really, really concerned about farmers now and their ability to access diesel. You know, it was so genuine.
He cares about their diesel when he hasn't cared about their water, he hasn't cared about their land, he hasn't cared about their power prices.
Their animals, their crops.
But now he wants them to have diesel.
Don't you dare buy any petrol, John, otherwise you're taking it away from our farmers.
No.
I'm sure Anthony Albanese was
let's
very
be positive,
sincere.
Dan. So that must mean that his pollsters and Paul Erickson, the Labor Party National Secretary, must be talking to him about, Prime Minister, talk about farmers.
Yeah, talk about petrol and cars and
good.
internal combustion engines, not EVs.
Yeah, he didn't say we should be buying electrical vehicles, did he?
No, he did not say that. But I think following the Prime Minister's national address that he is softening up the population. I think it was very softly, cuddly sort of address, but a little bit of that COVID-style psychology, which is if you don't wear a mask outside, you're a bad person. If you go buy a tank of petrol or a tank of diesel, you're a selfish person.
If you drive a car, you're selfish.
You're taking it away from farmers and nurses who really need it. Now, of course, they really need it, but this is deflecting away from the fact that his government's totally failed and making people feel bad about it.
The grand plan continues to unfold.
Go on.
Stop people using cars.
Oh, well, that's a part of it, yeah.
Stop people travelling. Stop people exercising their freedom of movement. Get them to work from home a little bit longer. So we've just rolled from COVID into don't drive a car.
Don't drive a car. Well, that's a bit of ground to cover, but I think what this...
Mate, it's all connected.
It's all connected, and we will have seen the South Australian election results, and which is rightly described as an earthquake in terms of what happened. I have.
You're a Liberal Party member in South Australia. What's been the reaction? You've had now a couple of weeks.
Well, there's two reactions.
Is this as bad as Adelaide's grand final loss?
What grand final loss? You mean the two that we won in 97, 98? Or that's the only ones I remember?
So you're going to say, don't worry, the Labor government can be forgotten, and we've had good Liberal governments in South Australia 50 years ago. Let's focus on that.
Let's focus on Thomas Playford.
Exactly.
Two reactions. One is, it's not that bad. It could have been worse. Yeah. I mean, that's relatively common.
Right.
The other reaction is we basically no longer exist. And if you look at the results...
the Liberal Party no longer exists.
The Liberal Party, if you look in the outer suburbs, the Liberal Party was relegated to fourth in pretty much every single outer suburban seat. So behind Labor, behind One Nation, behind the Greens. In a number of seats, they polled at 6 or 7% primary. We had a lot of good local candidates, not their fault at all, who did their best. But to be getting 5 or 6% primary in outer suburban seats is a complete and total disaster.
We love South Australia, we love Adelaide, but what does this mean for the rest of the country? Because people were saying this wouldn't happen in SA because SA is progressive. You had Don Dunstan, you're better educated, you're smarter. One Nation
Safari suits.
One Nation will never get a foothold in South Australia. So if that's South Australia, what does it mean for the rest of the country?
Well, South Australia is not left wing; it's centre, it's Labor, DLP right, and it has been for a very long time. So that's well, I mean, 65% no vote. The left wing state won't have a 65% no vote to the Voice. Look, nationally, I think there's a couple of things, and I just want to give a short overview of what actually happened in South Australia. So you look at the seats. So Labor's got 34. You need 24 to win. 34. Liberals currently 5. One Nation 3. Independents 4. So there's one more seat to call. It will either go Liberal or One Nation. But no matter what happens, One Nation and other, so independents, will have more seats than the Liberal Party.
Are they left-wing independents or centre?
A bit of a mismatch.
Okay.
Sort of regional type, not really affiliated.
Not necessarily teal, though.
Not necessarily. Not inner suburban teal, no. So theoretically, One Nation could form opposition with the independents. Now, I haven't heard that talked about, but that could definitely happen. But the other thing, John, so the Liberal Party primary went down by 17%. All right. Labor's primary also went down by 2.5%. what's really interesting, if you go to some of these outer suburban seats, so a seat like Elizabeth in Adelaide's outer north is a great example.
Which was the area you know well, because that
was within the federal electorate of Spence.
When you were a candidate?
And I was a candidate for the Liberal Party at the last federal election. That was a 70-30 Labor-Liberal seat on a two-party preferred basis. It is now 55-45 Labor One Nation. And that was driven by...
huge.
And there's about 3 or 4 seats where that's happened. Labor went backwards by more than 5% in about a dozen seats.
So this is Labor's working class base going One Nation.
They've left Labor, yeah. So, and Labor doesn't really know what to do about it. So I think that this will be replicated across the country in different ways, because every state has a different geographic component, a different historical component, economic, different migration effects and so forth. So you look at Victoria, it won't be exactly the same, but you are going to see outer suburban seats who don't want to vote Labor, who don't believe the Liberal Party speaks for them, will vote One Nation, and the debate is about who will they preference. Historically, they've preferenced Labor. Will they now go, well, we actually need to kick this government out, so we're going to vote One Nation and then preference Liberal? That's what's going to decide the election in Victoria. It's not going to be the primary votes of Liberal or Labor. So I think that's going to happen in Victoria, it'll happen in New South Wales, and it's going to happen federally as well.
So I as a Victorian, am intrigued by this argument. Well, Malinowskis is this great centrist, and he's now talking about patriotism. Well, as has been pointed out, he's never talked about patriotism ever. He says we shouldn't be divided, yet South Australia has a version of The Voice. Why hasn't any of that been called out? Is it a little bit like the phenomenon that we saw at the peak of Dan Andrews here in Victoria, whereby you had Liberals saying, no, we can't criticise Dan Andrews because that will rebound on us and we will then become unpopular?
Well, what I do know is there's only one person to have taken the fight to Malinowskis, and that was Pauline Hanson when she shirt-fronted him in the Advertiser building in the bottom floor, and he couldn't escape, and he can't handle it. I mean, all of his media is stage-managed. He's not good on the fly. And you say, okay, you believe in South Australia and Australia, well, then why are you doing a voice in a treaty which means reserved seats for Aboriginals in Parliament? There's no answer to that. But, yeah, you're right. The fight hasn't been taken, and if you don't fight someone, they'll be popular in the absence of any kind of criticism of what they do. Now, I don't think he's by any stretch of the imagination the worst premier. He's nowhere near as bad as Daniel Andrews or Jacinta Allen, but he's a very dangerous operator because he's very effective at giving the left what they want and getting away with it scot-free.
He can run an effective two-track strategy. So the left, he can say, I'll do this and I'll give you a voice and I'll run identity politics. But then to mainstream South Australians, he says something different. He says, I love footy, I love cars, and I like our flag.
But you know what? People have seen through it. So 30% primary vote for Labor in safe Labor, 30% primary vote for One Nation in outer suburban traditional Labor seats, right? They've seen through it. So I think this is one of the great things of the digital age is you can see through this stuff so easily that, sure, I like footy, I like cars, but at the end of the day, I also like, not living in poverty and being treated as a second-class citizen.
And what does it mean federally?
Well, I think the same thing will happen federally on a less severe scale. I mean, you're not going to get as big a swings as you get at a state level because the electorates are bigger, so you never get as big of a swing. But, if an election were held today, you'd have to say Liberals go backwards by a number of seats, Labor goes down in primary but picks up a few seats, One Nation probably picks up, 3, 4, 5 peri-urban or regional seats. I mean, that's where it is at the moment. Can the Liberal Party change in a fundamental way between now and election day? They can. But so far there's
Can they?
Yeah, they can. It's the last chance.
Is there any indication that the Liberal Party can do this? Because at the minute the Liberal Party still seems to be in a state of denial, and you've got these structural changes, and then you've got Labor's going to come after them. So Labor is going to give us a high taxing, high spending budget. They're going to put negative gearing on the table. They're going to talk about increasing taxes on capital gains. And as yet, the Liberals don't seem to have an answer to any of this.
Well, I think their answer will be to oppose it. But the question is, will people listen to it? And how fired up are people about it? I don't know how fired up people are. I mean, you could argue the 2019 election was an example of where, Bill Shorten went with a whole raft of not dissimilar changes. I don't believe the 2019 election was won by the coalition on that. It was won, in my view, by Matt Canavan and the Adani issue is what got him over the line, but people can debate that. But for a lot of people, it's quite abstract. Yes, there's a decent cohort that own multiple properties, but most people don't. I mean, a growing share don't even own one house. So to them, it's an abstract debate that doesn't affect them. So I find it hard to know the extent to which that's going to penetrate the public's consciousness.
Well, that's going to be a problem for the Liberals then running a small government, low tax agenda.
Yeah, because you need a private, like this is the thing, right? What does economic liberalism mean in the year 2026?
When we're all working for the government.
So if you go back and we talk about economic reform, well, that was in the context of an industrial manufacturing economy. What did it mean? It meant, and we had really high, top marginal tax rates, really high corporate tax rates, so forth. Cutting the tax rates so we can be globally competitive, reducing regulation to reduce the costs on business, decentralizing the industrial relations system so you can have more efficient employer-employee bargaining, and having free trade so that we can get earnings from exports and have cheaper imports so that our production costs come down. That was basically economic liberalism. Now we have a service-based economy. And we have an economy where a large and growing share of the population either directly work for government or indirectly work.
It's now more than 50%.
And so, well, what does that mean? How do you have industrial relations reform when it's government paying government? If it's, health department paying a nurse, what does,
And you have every policy driver attacking small business. So you now have the Fair Work Commission saying that over 18s are going to be paid the same rate as people who are experienced and have been in the same job for 20 years. You have an industrial relations system absolutely critical and attacking small business. You have a red tape burden, and as the IPO has pointed out, red tape is actually Australia's largest industry. The problem for the Liberal Party and Angus Taylor is he doesn't speak to any of this. And when they talk about, well, the solution is home ownership, well, 2 decades of home ownership starting to become out of reach has inculcated people to not understand and not appreciate it. So, I wrote this, when was it? Last year, as we know. So the average Australian house price last year for the first time, the median house price hit $1 million. In Sydney, the median house price is 13 times the average weekly wage. In the 1970s, it was 3 times. And I think one of the things that hasn't been pointed out is Australia has a lot of land which the left is not willing to use for housing because they don't like suburbs, they don't like people living in detached housing. Australia is one of the least urbanised countries in the world. About 1% of Australia is used for people to live in, and the rate in the US is 8 times that. None of this is being debated, and at the minute the Liberals are just being portrayed as, you believe in smaller government and lower taxes, which is something I don't understand anyway, and you won't deliver it because you've never actually really delivered it anyway.
Well, I think in terms of home ownership, the other thing is how fired up are young people about it? I think ownership is critical because we're heading more towards a kind of like as Joel Cochran, the great American analyst, talks about, a modern form of serfdom, which is you don't own really anything. You don't own a house. When I was growing up, you'd buy CDs. You would have bought vinyls, I assume. Yes. Not commenting upon your age, but
yeah, vinyl and even cassette tapes sometimes.
Cassette tapes, that was the one. But the point is, you owned it.
Yeah.
Now you purchase a streaming service, and I love Spotify and streaming services a lot. But the interesting thing is, you don't actually own the things that you have anymore. So there is definitely a move towards this permanent renter kind of thing, which basically means you're not the master of your own destiny. You're in the hands of somebody else. I think only a day or two ago, Melbourne approved, or Victoria approved, I believe it's the first ever in Australia, build to rent apartment complex, which means an apartment complex that you can't actually buy an apartment from. You can only rent it, which I'm very much opposed to. It's basically an investment vehicle for places like BlackRock and Vanguard to make money from, and the super funds to make money from. So this is a huge issue. But because home ownership has now become so abstract, it's so far out of reach for so many people, I don't know, whether when you saw we want to get more young people in homes, well, so do I. But as you say, what is the actual path? And the only way you can do it is by dramatically cutting immigration like now, doing a lot of the development that you've talked about. Otherwise, the only policies they have is like super for housing, which in principle is fine because it's our money, not the government's money. But that'll just increase prices because if you put more demand into the market without increasing supply, prices will go up. And again, who benefits? The investors benefit because more money is going into it.
And for me, it's a symbol or representation of the intellectual poverty of the Liberal Party, of the centre-right in Australia, or some of the centre-right politically, that the only thing they can offer young people is the unattainable dream of a house. They're not speaking to young people's existential needs and desires. They're not talking about how are you to live, how can we help you make sense of the world. We have presided over a system that has eroded your cultural memory, that has turned the foundations of our society and family life on their head. We have told you to go to university and learn something that will either make you a worse person or get you to hate this country, and then you'll be saddled with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and you're not going to be able to get a job that is in any way fulfilling or that will help you pay back these debts. And we're saying, we're just going to cut back on negative gearing so you can get a house. Talk to me about something real.
Hi, thanks for watching. Did you know that 3/4 of you watching this podcast aren't currently subscribed to the IPA's YouTube channel? So do us a favour, hit subscribe and you won't miss any of the action. While you're at it, head to ipa.org.au, follow the prompts to subscribe to the IPA's website, so that way you will find all of our research and analysis. Now back to the chat.
And we were just chatting, coming on air, about how we both listened to Joe Rogan's most recent podcast with Schellenberger. And for me, it was really interesting when, after they finished talking about dinosaurs and UFOs and Epstein, they got onto...
How did they get those 200-ton blocks up there, John? How else could they have got it up there?
They're not UFOs now, are they? Aren't they UAPs or something?
Don't know. It's a political party.
Yeah, well, indeed. But, Rogan, they get onto the real questions, which is how we live. And, I think Rogan said something really interesting about how he's now going to church and how he said that I'm paraphrasing, even if Christianity isn't real, then he's living as a Christian because that is the best way to live. Now, whether you live a religious life or a secular life, the question is still how are we to make sense of this world. And when people talk about the political parties eroding the economic structure and foundations of young people's lives, no, they have eroded your cultural existential being. And now they say, let us, get you a house. No, the Greens get this. The Greens get...
Wait, what? The Greens get it?
No, the Greens get it. The Greens get the desire for meaning and purpose. They say your role is to save the world. Your role is to deindustrialise. Your role is to tell people that everyone else is bad because you're part of a white Western industrial colonial complex. But at least the Greens are speaking to something deeper than either the Labor Party or the Liberal Party is doing at the moment. And again, so we've seen this IPA polling. So as we've talked about, young people are flocking to the notion of a country to which they can belong to and which they can be proud to. One thing that hasn't been talked much about is One Nation is polling very strongly with young people.
Well, I think millennials. With my cohort.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen this phenomenon around the world as well. Young people know that their cultural heritage has been wiped out and they want to have a sense of belonging.
Yeah, I mean, when I was on the booths pre-poll and polling day helping the various Liberal candidates, you could see all the One Nation people coming in by the pamphlets they take. And it's not a perfect measure, it's anecdotal and so forth. But my observation was mostly aged between 40 and 55. Kids, family, probably working class, middle class type people. This cohort, there's sort of a tendency to say that they're all angry boomers, and the implication being,
I am,
but you're not a boomer.
No,
you are angry.
I might be within a year, but I'm angry.
No, but you can never. Yeah, you'll never be a boomer, John. You're always going to be a Gen Xer.
Okay,
like I'll always be a millennial.
Okay,
yeah, you can't change your. You can't.
Are you becoming more right-wing as you get older?
This is not like gender, John. You can't just change it as you want.
Oh, Dan, don't say that. I don't want to get cancelled.
But there's this view of some, which is a kind of a psychological coping mechanism, which is, oh, well, you know, don't worry about it, they're going to die out. It's like, no, this group's getting bigger and more intransigent. And it's not hard to see why a large and growing share of Australians are sort of fed up with the political system, because no one, as you've outlined, no one is really speaking to these issues, much less offering an alternative to it. So the only alternative is to throw a brick at the system, which is what they're doing, basically. And, you know, for understandable reasons. Now, how constructive is it? I don't know. But what we have seen, John, and you and I have, and you sort of led the debate in Australia about the realignment, which means, you know, what you might, in broad terms, call older, you know, I don't want to say left wing, but people who would vote left, would vote Labor, would vote Democrats, moving to the right. We saw that with Brexit. We saw it with Trump. Now, the left and right axis doesn't work anymore, and it hasn't worked for 10 years. There's been all these pollsters that have taken a decade to catch up and say, actually, people are a bit more complex than that, because it's basically left-wing economic populism or right-wing economic populism combined with cultural conservatism is where it's moving, and either you get one or the other. That's where I think it's heading. And so here in Australia, the realignment has now happened. It started with the Teal vote, which were Liberal voters who were very affluent, who wanted something a bit different, something a bit trendy. They wanted to have a new handbag or a new jacket, so they voted Teal.
They wanted to display their
virtue,
their superiority, exactly.
And now you've got working class voting One Nation. And so the challenge for the Liberal Party is it's kind of passed them by without them really understanding it. It's like, guys, this has now happened. And Liberal Party is now basically a victim of it rather than a leader of it.
And for me, again, we've spoken about this and we've all written about this too, the claim that the Liberal Party never needed to worry about its base. It never needed to worry about people who thought our culture and our history and the idea that you stand under one flag, not three, was important. You know, these are people who might watch Sky. They might see you on Sky. They might listen to the mainstream. They might be IPA members. And these were people who were taken for granted, and the claim that these people would always vote Liberal has not been proved right, because we're free thinking. The Liberal Party or any political party is simply a vessel for the transmission of political ideas and beliefs and ideologies. So you've got that thing happening, and then you've also got the pollsters being wrong, because for a decade they've said don't talk about culture. You know, don't engage in the culture wars. And again, as we've spoken about, when Liberals are told by the Labor Party don't engage in the culture wars, then you know you're doing something right.
One of the greatest articles you ever wrote was during COVID. Do you remember this, when you said it's time to restart the culture wars? The point being that you needed to have a contest, because everything had been, you know, during COVID, everything had been accepted. You weren't allowed to debate it. And I think your point, if I remember correctly, was we actually have to have some political contests.
We have to have contests, but no, thank you, because people talk to me about COVID, and we at the IPA got so many things right about COVID, but I got something very wrong, which is I thought that would be the great economic reset. Not the reset towards deindustrialisation, it would be the reset to economic reality. And I remember I did a column in the Financial Review saying COVID will be the end of stop-go lollipop people on $120,000 a year. No, that's wrong, because they're now on $180,000.
Yeah, I was going to say you're right. They did stop at 120. They're on a lot more money.
You know, it's funny. It's sort of like we doubled down on unreality. You know, it was our chance to take stock of our freedoms, of how important our family were when we couldn't see them, the fact that, you know, whether elites operate from malign purposes or benign purposes, maybe it was an opportunity to say, well, sometimes they maybe get it wrong, maybe we should trust people, sometimes the advice that's given is self-interested. None of that happened, and it was as if COVID didn't occur, that we haven't imbued any of the lessons. We have forgotten that we ourselves allowed it to occur to us, especially over here in the eastern states. And we've just doubled down on some of the insanities of that period. And we've just spent more money and got into even more debt. I remember when the IPA, when was it when we first predicted $1 trillion of...
It was during COVID.
During COVID.
Maybe 2020.
And I remember a couple of people said, no, that's not right. We were spot on.
We're now there, yeah.
We're now there.
We might have been off for like 1 year or something.
Yeah.
We were there. And the only reason it didn't go up faster was, random fluctuations to commodity prices.
Yeah.
Well, on debt, don't you reckon it is interesting because it doesn't seem to matter to people, because you could argue it's a boy cries wolf, because you go, debt's really bad, and people go, oh, it is. And then, because I remember when Abbott was opposition leader, I think it was like $100 billion of debt was a big deal.
And I think our...
Like $80 billion or something.
Gross debt was 10% of GDP.
Yeah.
It was now 30%.
But people's lives still go on.
Yeah.
Right? Nothing has really been cut. It's not as if the trains don't work, or, people's day-to-day lives go on until they don't.
Well,
but people go, well, yeah, I agree it's a problem in the abstract, but my life
what does it mean? And now I was at a meeting, I spoke at a function a couple of weeks ago with a couple of private equity investors, and they were talking about the Victorian economy as a business. And they said the debt is now unsustainable for Victoria. It will, this is their view, it will never be paid back. And one of them was a fellow from overseas, and he said to me quite seriously, John, do you know what preparations are being made for default? I said, that's a really good question. And he pointed out that, when Victoria defaults and was close to defaulting and the federal government bails out Victoria, then Queenslanders and West Australians who have been used to laughing at Victorians and saying, oh, you poor people, you're the petri dish of the nation, are now going to actually suffer, because their taxes are going to have to pay for Dan Andrews and Jacinta Allen's decisions. And then we might get a little bit of a reality check. A little bit of a reality check would be Jess Wilson as leader of the opposition saying Victoria's debt is unsustainable, we're going to renege. That will mean no one will ever lend money to Victoria again, or at least for the foreseeable future. And that will certainly be a wake-up call too. Not suggesting that she does it, but exactly, you say there has to be something that will break this causation and get people to understand the dire circumstances that we're in.
Well, the bailout's already happening because federal government's underwriting the suburban rail loop.
That's right.
And the GST is a mechanism for internal bailouts. I think the GST is a less bad tax than what it replaced, but the implementation of it was very bad. It was one of the failures of the Howard government to have horizontal fiscal equalisation, which is a term that's used, but basically what it means is if your state is underperforming economically, you get a higher share of the
If you
GST
get Dan Andrews, you get more money.
If you crush your economy, you get a bigger GST
if you lock it
distribution.
down,
So WA actually uses its natural resources. It has more tax revenue. It cops a lower share. And that gets redistributed to Victoria that refuses to use its resources, as an example. So that's a failure of the mechanism of the GST, as one example.
But the major parties aren't speaking to any of this. And again, as we talked about the rise of One Nation and Pauline Hanson seem to be getting closer to discussion of these issues than anyone else.
On the COVID thing, I think it's interesting because it still gets brought up all the time, by people in conversation about what happened during COVID. Do you reckon? do you reckon that that it was a bit of a do you reckon that could happen? Do you reckon people would allow that to happen again?
Yep.
Go on. Why do you don't think?
No.
So let's play this.
And let's be serious for a.
I was.
Sorry, you're always being serious. Yeah, are you serious? Yeah.
I am being serious.
Yeah. Because
I sense there's been like a. If we've talked about in previous discussions about the lack of trust in politicians, media, and other institutions, including medical and doctors and so forth. People don't listen to them anymore. Certainly, anyone under 40 doesn't listen to a doctor.
Which has its own challenges.
I'm not saying
doctors are right.
I'm not saying it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's a consequence.
It's a serious issue
of the medical profession becoming politicized.
That's right. Not being transparent.
Yes, I sense that people don't trust stuff anymore. But you reckon they'll just go along? If the government said, you've got to work from home because we don't have enough fuel.
Yeah, I think both things can be true at the same time. I think that trust is breaking down, and I'm not one of these people who says, oh, that's necessarily a bad thing, because, institutions and people have to earn our trust. So I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. But at the same time, you can see exactly the same thing occurring, because we discovered during COVID fear is incredibly powerful. When the channels of news and information are controlled, and now there's even more effective ways of controlling information, debate and discussion. And I would love to say that COVID demonstrated that Australians are a freedom-loving, libertarian people, but we are not. Bad things can happen again, and I don't think we've still, and maybe we never will, come to terms with what we allowed to do to ourselves. And that memory has been erased because people don't want to talk about what occurred, and they need to think that it was all for a purpose, that the suffering had a point.
Well, I think the other thing is it was experienced very differently across the country. That's true. Someone living in Perth had a way different experience than someone living in Melbourne. So that's one thing. But isn't it the case that the only reason why the Victorian government got rid of the lockdowns is because there was going to be just widespread civil disobedience? Didn't it get to the point where enough people were on the streets and openly disobeying that they knew that it was going to be too hard to contain?
It was coming, but there still hasn't been a recognition of what the police and the authorities have done. And as I said, people are convincing themselves that it had a point. And when Brett Sutton went on Melbourne radio, he was the Victorian Chief Health Officer, and basically said most of the restrictions were made up and unnecessary. It disappeared without a trace into the ether because no one wanted to hear it.
Well, everyone knew it was true. Did they? I mean, it was obvious, wasn't it, that they were making it up for political reasons?
Yeah, it wasn't called out by the mainstream media, and
Peter
Credlin turns up at the press conferences of Dan Andrews and is attacked by the mainstream media for asking difficult questions.
Yeah. But I mean, those days are kind of over. I mean, the mainstream media is kind of dying, partly as a result of this. I mean, they complain about it.
Well, you put your finger on it.
If you're going to turn yourself into the communications arm of a government, then why would people listen to you?
Exactly.
Well, just building on the theme of lack of political leadership. So we've had Albo go out there with his national speech. One thing that's been lost in a lot of this, which is actually quite a big deal for those of us in policy wonk world, was the proposal for more seats in Parliament, which lasted, about 14 hours before Albanese killed it off. And what was so funny and transparent is he basically said, I'm killing it off because it's unpopular. He said, I've had a chat to Paul Erickson, who's the campaign director or national secretary, whatever, of Labor, and he reckons it's a bad idea, so we're not going to do it, guys. Now, I think this is a real shame because, this is somewhat of an unpopular opinion, certainly on the centre-right. But having more seats in Parliament would be a positive thing for Australia at this point in our history because for a few reasons. One is, you're more likely to get at least one good person in the Parliament. You're more likely, law of large numbers.
We could have two Alex Antiches in Parliament.
We could get two. We'll eventually get one in there. But the other one is just the electorates are just monsters. They're massive in terms of the number of people. I think when Hawke last did this in 1984, I think it was like 70,000 per seat. Now it's about double that, 120, 130. Thousand. And the reason this is a problem is because the Westminster system that we have is partly predicated on communities of common interest for it to work effectively. Because if you're a local MP and one of your jobs is to represent your electorate, you really can't do that when there's 4 or 5 different constituents and groups who don't share a common problem at a local level. So it inhibits the ability of effectiveness of local MPs. Then the other point, which I think is probably the most important for the nation, is we actually need more backbenchers. There are too many in Parliament that are on the cabinet or the shadow cabinet, and that undermines their ability to speak out because you get kicked out of cabinet and shadow cabinet. So if you have the UK tradition where it is normal for backbenchers to actually speak up, even if it's against their own party's position, well, that's kind of accepted as a part of democracy. That's never really succeeded in Australia, and it's one of the reasons why. Look at the hate group laws that we talked about Like, imagine you had more MPs in the coalition, for example. You wouldn't have just had Alex Antic crossing the floor. I guarantee you would have had another half dozen doing it. So I think it would have been... I understand the arguments against it, which is people say, you don't seriously reckon having more politicians is going to solve our problems. To which I say, well, we're more likely to get one good one who just might be able to solve our problems.
I'm torn because I've always argued for a bigger House of Representatives for all of those reasons, so that we get a more porous and diverse parliamentary representation. But at the same time, I wouldn't trust the current government with anything. They would only have been doing it for their own narrow political partisan purposes, like they changed the donation laws. People have to understand no political party will ever change anything to its detriment. So by definition, Labor must originally have thought it was a good idea, and you could completely understand Angus Taylor's position. In the current environment, it was a politically appropriate decision to make to oppose us having more parliamentarians, but I hope that it hasn't killed off, although it probably has for the foreseeable future, a debate about how our parliament works, about how the executive is not really responsible to the parliament anymore, how our Senate committee systems are ineffective, the growth of the public service, the lack of control over what our executive agencies do, even our voting system. I mean, I'd love to have on the agenda again the principle of compulsory voting, which is unique in the world almost and hasn't demonstrated better outcomes. Compulsory preferential voting, I think, is completely anti-democratic. I should be able to vote for one person, or if there's 10 people on the ballot, 10 people. The idea the government says I must allocate my preferences, I think, is completely wrong. And it seems, though, that all of those interesting debates might now be put on the back burner, but they won't be put on the back burner at the IPA, because we're going to continue to be arguing and talking about them, because they're really important discussions.
All right, well, we'll go to your favourite segment, and then we've got some exciting news to share after that. Should we talk about... I was wondering why you've got a book of Malcolm Fraser, and I'm slightly worried about, is John going woke? Is he going to do a bit of a left-wing turn, do a special interview at the Guardian?
Am I going to do a Malcolm Fraser, Malcolm Turnbull? Well, no. First, I need to say thank you to everyone, all three people who've told me they have purchased a copy of Golden Thread, which was the book of... It's only about 1,000 pages on Introduction to Western Civilization. Thank you. They've told me they're enjoying it. One of the people who emailed me said that he was able to give up his gym membership because it's so heavy he can carry that around instead. So I've gone with something a little shorter. This week I've just done a review of it for the IPA review that's coming out in the next month or two, and it is Gerard Henderson's personal reflection on Malcolm Fraser, published by our friends at Connor Court. Gerard Henderson, of course, needs no introduction, a wonderful historian and journalist. He most recently has done a forensic analysis of the George Pell case and the grave carriage of justice that was conducted in that case. But in Malcolm Fraser, what Gerard does, and he worked in the Fraser government for a junior minister. He knew Malcolm Fraser both in government and then afterwards. He revisits 1975, a pivotal moment in Australian history, and he answers a couple of questions. He says, how does this guy, Malcolm Fraser, presented as a conservative, presented as someone who believed in conservative values, then comes into government and then becomes basically a continuation of the Whitlam government? So for me, that's one of the interesting questions of post-war Australian politics. And for Gerard, as he talks about, it was the manner of Fraser coming to government. It was 1975, and Fraser never believed that he ran a legitimate government. And Fraser's ministers were divided between those who, and they're still divided between those who say that from the moment Fraser was appointed Prime Minister and didn't win legitimately, it was destined to fail. So the fact
But
that
did he win in?
so the fact that
75?
Fraser won an overwhelming victory in 75 in the election in December, he won again overwhelmingly in 77, was discounted because the left was so effective at claiming that what Fraser did was undemocratic, it was illegitimate, even though Gough Whitlam, and again, Gerard makes this point really well, even though Gough Whitlam had for years before, when Whitlam was in opposition, said, we will block supply. We want to get rid of the bad Liberal country national parties as prior to 72. We will block supply. So when Whitlam does it, he is applauded by the left. When Fraser does it, he is attacked by the left. So that's a really interesting point of discussion in the book. And the other, one of the other many themes in the book is how Fraser then governed very much in the Whitlam mould. He adopted multiculturalism and he turbocharged that. He didn't undertake many of the reforms in the sphere of economic policy that had been discussed, although again, as Gerard says, the idea that there was a neoliberal Reaganite Thatcherite plan ready to be taken by Fraser off the shelf isn't quite accurate. But that said, the key point that Gerard makes is that Fraser, coming to power in 75, hadn't realised how much Australia had changed. He hadn't realised how much Gough Whitlam had centralised government, how he dramatically expanded the role of the state, how our cultural institutions had dramatically been altered, and he attempted to government in 1975 and afterwards until 1983 as if it was the mid-1960s. And it's a really interesting discussion about a period of history that people might know 1975, but 75 to 83, Fraser is very much written off as Prime Minister, the forgotten Prime Minister. We tend to think of him and, the two Malcolms, Fraser and Turnbull, as both going left-wing and, disparaging the party that, gave them everything. But it's a really interesting discussion about a fascinating period of Australia's history.
Wasn't that fascinating about how I didn't know that he's always thought he was illegitimate? And it does show really this issue that the centre-right has in not being sort of political enough. Like, who cares? You're the Prime Minister.
And
Go
you
and
have
get the job done. And then he won. And then he won again.
And he won again. He won massive victories. And he controlled the Senate. He was in some sense the most powerful post-war Prime Minister, and it was a combination of he felt he was illegitimate, and he had to at least apologise for the way he came to power, and he didn't have a program. He said, vote for me, I'm not Whitlam. All right, okay, you get a massive majority in the House of Representatives and the Senate. What are you going to do?
Wouldn't it be undoing the Whitlam stuff?
Well, and none of which he did.
To me, it seems like Australians really wanted... Maybe they didn't regret voting for Whitlam because you could argue, following Menzies and then the rotation of Liberal leaders and Prime Ministers, that there needed to be a change, and I think that's probably fair because they've been in power for 20-odd years, so probably time for a change. But I think it was like, wow, Whitlam's really stuffing the joint. Let's get rid of a lot of this stuff. And I think Fraser came across as more of a mild-mannered, steady hand at the till. He's a bit more urbane than Menzies. So he's
a bit more modern,
bit more
younger. I think he was like
next generation
odd when he became Prime Minister.
So I get it.
Yeah.
But then I think to me it shows that people were yearning to get rid of the excesses of Whitlam, and the centre-right never did it, and then we got stuck with it forever.
That's right. And again, as Gerard Henderson documents so well, the rate of increase of government spending that was 10 to 15 to 20% between 72 and 75 was only brought down to about 10% increases.
Oh, they halved it. They halved it, John. Alrighty. Well, let's share some very exciting news as well, I think, to our viewers, John. Your exciting news.
Yes, I have some.
You have some exciting news.
News, Dan, that in November this year, I will become the president of Campion College. Campion College is a Catholic liberal arts College in Western Sydney, and I'll be concluding my time at the Institute of Public Affairs, which has now come up to past some 20 years. And I will be very much looking forward to continuing to watch and listen to the mainstream, but I won't be a participant.
No, well, the mainstream will continue.
The mainstream will live on because the mainstream always
bigger than
lives on.
us. It's bigger than all of us, John. So it's going to continue. I'll keep talking. I'll be here, and we're going to have some exciting guests come on, and we're going to very much invite viewer participation in terms of what they would like to see. So the mainstream will go on.
And you promised me a couple of special mainstream episodes.
We're going to do a special mainstream where you're going to be able to really give us, I guess, a retrospective on 20 years, not just the IPA, but Australia, and what has changed in 20 years, what has gotten better, what has gotten worse, and what the future is, which I'm really looking forward to that.
And why I am optimistic and why we must be optimistic. And I think when we talked about doing a podcast like this, we talked about the wisdom of the people being in the mainstream. And we've talked about when political parties reflect the wisdom of the mainstream, Australian values, what the majority of the public are seeking and looking for, then invariably the right decisions will be made. And when we go off course, it's because politicians think they know better, but no one knows better than the mainstream, Dan.
I agree. All right, well, I look forward to that retrospective, and I'm excited about your future at Campion because it's such an important institution, and the show will go on. So, John, we'll leave it there for today.